This is my ranking of monster taming games on Nintendo Switch that I've played based purely on my personal experience. Each one is placed from masterpiece down to trash, depending on how fun the creature collection and training systems are, how strong the team building and battles feel, and how well the progression keeps things engaging. Let's get straight into the list. World of Final Fantasy started as a really charming surprise because the tiny monster designs and colorful world instantly reminded me of older handheld RPGs I used to play for hours. I liked collecting mirages, stacking them together in battle, and testing different team setups that changed how fights worked. The turn-based combat stayed entertaining since different formations could completely shift my strategy, and seeing familiar Final Fantasy creatures in cute forms added a lot of personality to the adventure. I also enjoyed meeting classic characters from older Final Fantasy games because it made the journey feel more special than a regular spin-off. The biggest problem was the long campaign, since the battles and dungeon layouts became repetitive after many hours, and exploration rarely felt rewarding enough to break that repetition. This game easily earns a place in my great tier. Nexomon Extinction. And Nexomon gave me a monster collecting adventure that felt nostalgic while still adding enough modern ideas to keep the gameplay fresh for many hours. I liked exploring new regions, catching rare creatures, and building teams that work differently depending on stamina management during battles. The combat looked simple at first, but longer fights made me think more carefully about every move instead of repeatedly using the strongest attacks. I also enjoyed the humor because the dialogue constantly joked about RPG cliches and kept the story entertaining during slower sections. Swapping monsters, leveling weaker team members, and experimenting with different builds was quick and easy, which made progression smoother than many games in this genre. Some story moments felt predictable, but these games still belong in my great tier today easily. Monster Sanctuary surprised me because it mixed monster collecting with Metroidvania exploration in a way that constantly made progression feel rewarding. I enjoyed unlocking new movement abilities through different monsters since every new creature could open hidden paths, secret rooms, or shortcuts that I could not reach earlier. The pixel art looked beautiful. The soundtrack matched every area perfectly, and exploring the world stayed interesting across the entire adventure. What kept me invested the most was the battle system, because team synergy, combo building, buffs, and elemental effects actually mattered during fights, instead of battles becoming mindless grinding. I also liked experimenting with equipment, skill trees, and different monster combinations to create stronger strategies for difficult bosses. A few late-game sections became grindy, but the gameplay variety kept things exciting almost the whole time. This easily rises into my excellent tier. Shin Megami Tensei V Vengeance gave me one of the most rewarding turn-based monster collecting experiences I have played, because every battle required careful planning and smart team building. I loved recruiting demons, fusing stronger combinations, and constantly adjusting my party around elemental weaknesses, buffs, and extra turn mechanics during difficult fights. The ruined world, eerie atmosphere, and heavy soundtrack created a mood that stayed memorable throughout the adventure. I also enjoyed exploring the large areas because hidden bosses, side quests, and rare demons always gave me another reason to keep searching every corner of the map. The story pacing slowed down in a few sections, and some areas felt emptier than they should have, but the combat depth and atmosphere remained addictive across the entire journey. This game easily stands in my masterpiece tier. Digimon Survive felt different from most monster taming games I played because the story focused far more on character drama, dark moments, and difficult choices instead of non-stop collecting and battling. I enjoyed the visual novel approach since the conversations, emotional scenes, and unsettling atmosphere made the adventure feel more serious than a normal Digimon game. The cast slowly became more interesting as the journey continued, and several scenes genuinely surprised me once characters started facing harsh consequences for their actions. I also liked seeing the Digimon evolve alongside the friendships I built because it made progression feel tied to the story. The tactical combat was easily the weakest part because battles stayed repetitive, basic, and far less interesting than the narrative sections around them. Still, this game earns a spot in my good tier. Coromon has given me the classic monster collecting feeling I wanted, while adding enough new mechanics to stop it from feeling like a simple Pokémon copy. I enjoyed exploring the colorful world, catching stronger Coromon, and building teams around the potential system because it allowed much more customization than I expected. Finding superior or perfect variants became surprisingly addictive since I could shape their stats differently and experiment with unusual builds during battles. I also liked how the game handled exploration because the pixel art, animated environments, and creature designs made every new area feel lively and memorable. The combat system took some time to fully understand because typings and skills worked differently from most monster taming games, but once I adjusted, battles became much more strategic and rewarding. Coromon easily secures a place in my great tier ranking. Monster Hunter Stories 2 Wings of Ruin gave me a monster taming adventure that felt much bigger and more emotional than I originally expected. I loved exploring the huge environments, stealing monster eggs from dens, and slowly building a team of powerful monsties with different abilities and elemental strengths. The world looked beautiful almost everywhere I traveled, and the colorful art style made every new region enjoyable to explore for long sessions. I also liked how the story balanced light-hearted moments with more serious scenes because it made the journey feel memorable without becoming overly dramatic. Collecting and upgrading monsties stayed addictive since there were so many creatures to experiment with throughout the adventure. The combat system could become repetitive because fights sometimes dragged on too long, but the exploration and monster collecting easily placed this game in my excellent tier. Quest started with an interesting setup and a huge world that looked like an old-school RPG, but the longer I played, the more frustrated I became. I liked the freedom to explore different areas and slowly build my character, especially with the amount of spells, equipment, and skills available. The problem was that progression felt extremely slow because combat became repetitive very quickly. Quests often felt confusing, and traveling across the world started feeling exhausting instead of rewarding. I also struggled with the stiff movement, basic combat animations, and constant backtracking because it made long play sessions feel draining. Some mechanics had good ideas, but the experience never stayed consistently fun enough to keep me invested for very long. This easily drops into my trash tier ranking without much hesitation after finishing the adventure. Temtem gave me a monster collecting adventure that felt very familiar at first, but the deeper battle mechanics slowly made it stand out from other games in the genre. I enjoyed the focus on double battles because every fight required more planning, stamina management, and team synergy instead of simply spamming the strongest attacks repeatedly. The colorful world, smooth animations, and creative creature designs also kept exploration enjoyable across most of the journey. I liked seeing other players running around the world since it made the areas feel more active, even when I mostly played alone. Some difficulty spikes forced me to rethink my entire team setup, which made victories feel rewarding once I adapted properly. The online requirement and microtransactions definitely hurt the experience at times, but this game still earns its place in my good tier. Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth was a much deeper monster collecting RPG experience than I expected when I first started playing it. I loved building huge Digimon teams, constantly evolving and de-evolving creatures, and experimenting with different forms to unlock stronger abilities later in the game. The futuristic setting and digital world also helped the adventure stand out because it mixed detective mysteries, hacking themes, and classic Digimon ideas together surprisingly well. I enjoyed both stories included in the package, especially since the characters and emotional moments became more interesting as the plot slowly escalated. The turn-based combat stayed engaging because team building and elemental matchups mattered during tougher fights. Some side quests disrupted the pacing a little too often, but the amount of content and addictive progression easily pushed this game into my excellent tier. Siralim Ultimate gave me one of the deepest monster team-building systems I have seen in this genre because the amount of combinations and strategies felt almost endless. I spent a huge amount of time experimenting with different creatures, passive abilities, status effects, and synergies just to create stronger party setups for later battles. What kept me invested was how every new monster could completely change my strategy instead of simply acting like a stronger replacement for an older creature. I also liked the constant sense of progression because the game kept introducing new mechanics, systems, and customization options across many hours. The visuals were definitely basic, and some menus became overwhelming once the mechanics started stacking together, but the addictive gameplay loop carried the experience for me. The sheer depth and replay value easily pushed this game into my excellent tier. Botworld Odyssey became a really fun surprise once I started exploring its world because the mix of open areas, creature collecting, and real-time battles stayed entertaining for long sessions. I enjoyed traveling across different biomes, finding new bots, upgrading my team, and experimenting with stronger combinations built around different combat roles and abilities. The battle system stayed engaging because positioning and timing abilities during fights mattered more than I expected at first. I also liked how the game let me progress at my own pace without constantly pushing the main story forward every few minutes. The colorful visuals, fast loading times, and lighthearted atmosphere made exploration enjoyable throughout most of the adventure. Some gameplay loops became repetitive later on, especially while farming upgrade materials, but collecting and customizing bots was enough to keep me invested. This lands in my good tier. Cassette Beasts surprised me with how creative and different it felt compared to many monster collecting RPGs on Nintendo Switch. Exploring the island, recording creatures onto cassette tapes, and testing different beast combinations kept the adventure consistently entertaining for hours. The fusion mechanic stood out the most because combining monsters created strange new forms and opened many useful strategies during difficult battles. The soundtrack added a lot to the experience as well, since several songs made important story moments feel much more memorable while exploring the world. I liked how the story slowly revealed darker mysteries beneath the colorful atmosphere, and many side characters added personality through funny dialogue and unusual interactions. Some puzzles became frustrating to figure out, and a few longer battles dragged too much, but the creativity alone places this game in my masterpiece tier. Dragon Quest Monsters. The Dark Prince reminded me why classic turn-based monster collecting RPGs can stay addictive for dozens of hours when the progression loop feels rewarding. I enjoyed scouting new monsters, experimenting with synthesis combinations, and slowly building stronger teams that could handle tougher tournaments and bosses later in the adventure. The world also stayed interesting because different regions constantly changed with seasons and weather, which made exploration feel more dynamic than I expected. I liked the story more than I thought I would, since Psaro's journey and the supporting cast added emotional moments alongside the lighter Dragon Quest charm. Watching weaker monsters evolve into much stronger creations through synthesis became incredibly satisfying after long grinding. The pacing occasionally slowed because leveling fresh monsters took patience, but the monster systems and world design easily placed this game in my excellent tier. Moonstone Island mixed farming, exploration, and monster collecting together in a way that kept me busy almost every time I picked it up on Switch. I spent hours growing crops, upgrading my house, exploring floating islands, and building stronger monster teams through the card-based battle system. The combat became much more interesting once I unlocked stronger cards and started creating better combinations for my creatures during tougher fights. Exploring new islands also stayed rewarding because hidden dungeons, resources, and rare spirits constantly gave me reasons to keep traveling farther across the world. I liked how relaxing the overall atmosphere felt since farming, fishing, decorating, and relationship building balanced out the more dangerous exploration sections nicely. A few early game tasks became slightly repetitive, but the huge amount of gameplay variety easily places this game in my great tier. Digimon World Next Order had a really interesting idea, because raising Digimon felt closer to taking care of virtual pets instead of simply collecting monsters and battling non-stop. I liked watching my partners evolve into stronger forms, discovering new Digimon paths, and slowly building a better relationship with them over time. The game also had a huge amount of Digimon to unlock, which made every new evolution feel rewarding after long training sessions. The biggest issue was how repetitive and exhausting the raising systems became, because constantly managing hunger, tiredness, training, and bathroom needs started slowing the adventure down too much. Battles also felt less exciting than I expected, since my Digimon mostly fought automatically while I gave limited commands from the side. The monster raising mechanics and massive Digimon roster were still enough to keep this in my good tier. Ni no Kuni Wrath of the White Witch felt like playing through a beautiful animated movie, because the world, music, and emotional story stayed memorable from beginning to end. I became invested in Oliver's journey very quickly, and several scenes genuinely hit harder than I expected from a monster collecting RPG. Exploring towns, learning new spells, and recruiting familiars kept the adventure rewarding across the entire game. The Studio Ghibli art style made every location look incredible, while the soundtrack added even more emotion during important moments and battles. I spent a lot of time experimenting with different familiars and evolving them into stronger forms for difficult fights later in the story. The battle system occasionally became frustrating because the AI partners made terrible decisions during combat, but this game belongs in my masterpiece tier. That's my full ranking of monster taming games on Nintendo Switch based on team building depth, creature variety, and how consistently the progression stays fun across the whole journey. Thanks for watching.